Hello everyone, thank you for coming. I would like to thank Elizabeth Su for the invitation and the opportunity to present one of the seminars of this series. Today I will share with you part of what I have been working on for these past few years under my PhD research. This ethnographic research draws from a year of fieldwork in Sichuan among the Qiang ethnic minority. It was a time split between urban Qiang medicine clinics and two mountain villages where I compared healing practices and explored understandings of what constitutes Qiang medicine and Qiang medicines. Apart from conducting participant observation with villagers and medicinal herb collectors, as well as at clinics, I also conducted interviews with a number of practitioners, academics, many of whom share responsibilities at the government level, as well with people working in China's pharmaceutical industry. Today I will be narrowing the scope of my findings and speak of ethnic Qiang medicines, the different ways under which these are defined, and how these feature among the industrial aspirations of those already working in and with China's pharmaceutical industry, as well as among those struggling to get an industry of Qiang medicines off the ground. I will start by giving you a brief introduction to the Qiang and to why the denomination Qiang offers a very important case to understand aspects of otherness, ethnicity dynamics, ethnic unification, and of nation-state in China. Then I will transpose this to the field of medicine and medicines and explore what makes a medicine Qiang, revealing it to be a very complicated and contested ethnic attribution to medicines, the features of which I have organized under 4 different domains. Apart from general ethnic label attributions, I found 2 specific cases where, respectively, a species and a variety were allocated the ethnic Qiang label by some. The first was to Qianghuo, literally meaning Qiang life, the name of which has been used for at least around 2000 years. Its Latin name is Notopterygum incisum. Its connection to the Qiang people was made by urban dwellers who used history and legends alike to support it. The second was to Wabu Beimu, or Fritillaria unibracteata wabuensis. The latter was given the name Qiang Beimu by a pharmaceutical company in the 2 years prior to my interview with their representative. The variety itself had already been identified over 30 years before. These 2 cases of ethnic label attribution, the first focusing on an imagined past, while the second on future possibilities, raised several issues and were enveloped in particular tensions, which I will develop on. In the end, I look into this prospective industry and how it features in a strained supply chain with a demand that far outweighs the supply, as well as among different practical considerations in production, regulations, and marketing. Since at present there are no proprietary medicines registered in the market with Qiang ethnic labeling and with only a couple of products being sold in clinics in small scale, the attribution of Qiang ethnicity was directed mostly to raw materials by my informants rather than towards compound preparations. However, this was something occasionally frowned upon, on one hand for what I suspect were worries around claims of resource ownership, on the other for it being considered a false attribution. I will end this seminar by contrasting the widespread enthusiasm and notion of urgency for development and industrialization that I found among those with stakes in such industry with the apprehension of some, as well as with the disinterest of those living in Qiang villages. I will argue that ethnic attribution is closely related to the future stakes in this prospective industry and that there is the anticipation of very unequal benefits among the Qiang population at large for such enterprise. The development that is taking place at the moment is very much in line with what is encouraged by national policies as well as by the WHO traditional medicine strategy. These were photos taken in our village in Wenchuan, the second village where I conducted fieldwork, and this was my host, this lovely lady that you can see here. The contemporary Qiang live on the eastern fringe of the Tibetan Plateau along the Sichuan-Gansu corridor of deep mountain valleys, which is home to several ethnic minorities. There are around 300,000 Qiang in this area, called the Aba Prefecture. Many call themselves Zhme, a word which equates to the concept of us, spoken in Chinese as Erma. The Qiang speak a Tibetan-Burman language in very distinct dialects, often mutually unintelligible, which is commonly known as Qiang language, the usage of which is in decline. They are often associated with the ancient Qiang, the first mention of which is around 1300 BC on oracle bone inscriptions of the Shang dynasty. However, that relation is problematic. Through history, the Qiang was a blanket term that stood for those people in the West who are not one of us. Professor Wang Mingke, who has been researching the Qiang for decades, argues that in time, more and more of these Western so-called barbarians were classified by the Chinese into new ethnic categories and therefore were pulled out from the blurry category of the Qiang. Finally, during the Ming and Qing periods, the term Qiang denoted only the non-Han people living in the upper Min River Valley and Beichuan area. This was a premise borrowed from contemporary Chinese historians taken not only by Reverend Thomas Torrance and David Crockett Graham between the 1920s and the 1940s, conducting missionary and scholar work, but also by those conducting the ethnic classification project of the 1950s, and anthropologists such as Fei Xiaotong, who based their arguments of a Qiang ethnic minority with a heritage directly linked to the ancient Qiang. It is important to bear in mind that in the ethnic classification project, the Qiang, like other Chinese minorities, were attributed an ethnonym that differed from their autonym, in this case, Zhme. This meant that, before the 1950s, most of them had actually never heard of the term Qiang. To complicate things further, even Zhme was historically a widespread but not mutually agreed on denomination. Communities identify themselves and those sharing the same valley as Zhme, but excluded those upstream as barbarians and those downstream as crafty Chinese. Their identification and categorization under a common denomination of Qiang in the 1950s was in fact not an academic endeavor with the aim to accurately describe existing communities, but a consciously political one, preparing the ground for future governance, therefore outlining plausible communities instead. This has also been argued by Mullaney in his book Coming to Terms with the Nation. In these recent decades, those Qiang who proceed into further studies in a way get to learn about themselves and about historicized narratives of descent. Many of the practitioners that I spoke with brought up the many historical mythical figures in China that they were convinced of having been Qiang. Here you can see one of them. This is a statue of Da Yu in Wenchuan, who was famed for founding the Xia dynasty 4,000 years ago and for flood control. This perceived ancient influence in China's culture and society is something that practitioners held on to as form of legitimacy when defining Qiang medicine, positioning themselves as the inheritors of ancient knowledge and as the oldest ethnic minority in China. This is a way to navigate China's social-political landscape and carve a space that is valued in the Chinese healthcare market and in society at large, as well as establishing an ethnic identity. Therefore, being Qiang is a recent condition, a recently expressed identity, but performed as if it had been done so since immemorial times. Among practitioners, the leading and most influential one at the government level, who I will call Dr. Zhang, defended that in terms of medical theory, Qiang medicine is the ancestor of Chinese medicine, having them developed side by side. He was someone who used predominantly Chinese proprietary medicines in his orthopedics clinic, while another, who treated a variety of conditions and only assembled prescriptions for herbal slices, Yin Pian, disagreed, remarking that Qiang medicines did not have a theory or system, but that was grounded in practices and experience with medicines and had given Chinese medicine its soul 5,000 years ago. I quote, "There is no system, no theory in diagnosing patients. Qiang medicine only uses medicines. It asks what medicine cures what disease, while Chinese medicine asks what disease uses what medicine. They're inverse. So if you want to learn medicine well, you should learn medicines first." End of quote. Both refer to Shennong, the divine farmer, who you see here in this illustration, famed for having tried a large number of different herbs in order to assess their medicinal value as having been Qiang. For those who are not familiar with this, he is the one associated with the divine farmer Materia Medica, which was compiled between the years 200 and 250 AD from various sources and not from one divine farmer, and which is considered the oldest Chinese pharmaceutical written work. These practitioners were of the opinion that it contained the medical wisdom of the ancient Qiang people, and they thought the writings originated from Qiang areas. Among practitioners, there was a constant insistence on a common genealogy and history that permeated the boundary between Han and Qiang, in people as in medicine, portraying the majority Han and the minority Qiang the same as well as distinct from each other. This allegory of brotherhood can be seen here in this photo taken in the Government Culture Office of the first village where I conducted fieldwork. This one is very telling of the fraternal relationship envisioned by the Chinese government of the Han and Qiang ethnicities. It is a large statue on a Hunan province hilltop of the mythical emperors Yandi and Huangdi, who in China are widely taken as brothers and respective ancestors of the Qiang and the Han. So here you have an idea of what the concept of Qiang entails. When it comes to the contested ethnic markers that attribute Qiang ethnicity to medicines, from the data that I have collected, I have organized them under 4 different domains. 3 of activity, which are contact, processing, and usage, and a 4th, which is place of origin. There was little agreement on which should stand as the defining feature of Qiang medicines, and there was also a spectrum running between a far-reaching inclusiveness to a narrow specificity of what constituted Qiang medicines. I argue that this variability is characteristic of an aspirational setup for the creation of a pharmaceutical sector, with varying views situated along different stakes on a prospective ethnic pharmaceutical industry, even with the ethnic label being used sometimes indiscriminately for marketing purposes, while viewing medicines privately as strictly ethnicity-free botanical products. Therefore, it appears that the different ways of enforcing and refusing such ethnic attribution are contingent on industrial aspirations and also on the disinterest of those without such industrial stakes. The first domain was by virtue of mere contact with Qiang people, through collection or by being passed by one's ancestors. It covered Qiang medicines as those that were collected by Qiang people or shown how to collect by one's Qiang ancestors, with one informant mentioning particular harvesting times specific to different ethnicities. The second was by processing, powder, and transmission of secret formulas, MPharm. Some practitioners argue that this processing meant that by employing a certain Qiang processing, even medicines from distant places could be turned into Qiang medicines. This Qiang processing was described by a Qiang doctor as involving religious elements, while a village doctor, on the other hand, described it simply as a better one than that used by the Han, since it involved a single stage of extraction instead of 2, which meant that the medicine would be better and more concentrated. This was a method dismissed by another doctor, as he claimed that very few people knew how to do real powder, and that it was irrelevant in defining the Qiang ethnicity of medicines. Others spoke of different processing methods as altering not only the efficacy of a medicine, but also their indication and even toxicity. One doctor spoke of different processing methods among the Qiang when it came to handling the toxicity of aconite, arsenic, and that of mercury, the latter used rarely but albeit more often in Qiang medicines than in Chinese medicines, according to him. One Qiang doctor, although referring to Chinese medicine as a generic term and not distinguishing Qiang medicine, in particular used the scale of processing as a distinction between Chinese and Qiang medicines. The first, quote, being dug for money, sent to the pharmaceutical factory in large quantities, while when it came to Qiang medicines, this existed in small quantities with low productivity, often from a secret formula. However, he still saw in a favorable manner Qiang medicines as slowly entering the stage of large-scale production. A village doctor who processed and sold medicinal herbs saw the ethnicity as something of medicines as something changing along the route of collection, processing, and preparation. He took all raw medicinal materials to be Chinese medicines, later becoming Qiang medicines after his processing. However, should these medicines that he sold end up in a hospital in town, they would be prepared according to Chinese medicine prescriptions and so become Chinese medicines again before being administered to patients. The third domain covered a particular therapeutic usage or a more general cultural usage as a determinant for what constituted Qiang medicines. Informants predominantly used the anthropocentric language of attitude towards medicines or understanding of medicines, together with an evolutionist take on, quote, a long-term process of trial and error, realizing the properties of a medicine, its benefits to the body, or by feeling one's way through accumulated clinical experience. The different attitude towards medicines between the Qiang and the Han was explained by a village doctor as Qiang people being more single-minded, 专一, and therefore treating an illness directly for its symptom, usually using a single medicine, while the Han would have more complex solutions. This simplicity was, according to a Qiang doctor, due to in the past, Qiang doctors not dispensing formulations or compound drugs, but mainly single drugs instead, which would be used in succession, treating different symptoms that would appear along the course of an illness. As he saw it, these successions were later used by Chinese medicine for some of the proprietary medicines that circulated in the market. In this way, he again attributed to Qiang the ancestry through practice and not theory of therapeutic aspects of Chinese medicine. Dr. Zhang referred to this usage of medicine as deeply cultural and inseparable from Qiang culture, for I quote, "Qiang culture is a deep vein that runs between Qiang people and Qiang medicines. This cultural specificity determined that some medicines, particular plant or animal parts, considered valuable in Qiang medicine, were considered useless in Chinese medicine or partially useful in the conditions that they treated. Also with different forms of administration, and it was this specificity that made, for example, water, according to him, one of the most important medicines among the Qiang." In regards to categorization of medicines, Dr. Zhang insists that there was an extra flavor to the 5 flavors Wu Wei of Chinese medicine. That was Nambing, Ma, which is quite specific for Sichuan, and added to bitter, sour, sweet, salty, and acrid. He also referred to an added pair to the 4 thermal influences described in Chinese medicines, cold, cool, warm, and hot, and that was fire and ice, as well as 2 extra properties that Qiang medicine attributed to medicines, which were removing the ice and breaking the water. Instead of thinking in terms of properties, another doctor, on the other hand, pointed towards different contraindications and incompatibility between medicines when he prescribed Qiang medicines compared to Chinese medicines. 2 other academic informants were also of the opinion that the theoretical background on which one stood, whether it was Qiang medicine theory or Yi minority medicine theory, for the use of a particular medicine, determining its ethnicity at the particular instance of therapeutic use. A 4th domain that was often but not always disconnected from human activity of the Qiang was the place of origin. This was particularly relevant when describing cultivated medicines using the label of authentic Dao Di, occasionally Di Dao, or authentic Qiang medicines, Dao Di Qiang Yao, which would be associated simply to factors such as soil and climate of a Qiang region, or at times to a history of usage in the area. Lastly, there was also an outright denial by some informants of a Qiang ethnicity of medicines, or a subordination of these to the label of Chinese medicines. Although 2 academics and a hospital director referred to Qiang ethnicity as contingent to medicines being collected and used in Qiang areas as opposed to Han areas, in general the idea of a medicine being an authentic Qiang medicine by virtue of location was widely disputed. Dr. Zhang made a distinction between local, Dang Di, meaning a medicine that grew locally, and authentic, Dao Di, which stood for a medicine characteristic of a location. For him, the authenticity that he claimed was historically documented, for he took all the medicines described in the Shenong Ben Cao, the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica, as being from Qiang areas and growing in the mountains of the region. According to him, even if these days one could also find these medicines down by the foothills, they were different in nature given the different altitude at which they grew, making the ones growing in Qiang areas Qiang medicines. So the discussions of ethnic authenticity and location were starkly disregarded by one Qiang doctor who called it a superficial understanding of these matters, stating that, quote, "real Qiang medicine can be produced anywhere." By placing practitioners and lay Qiang people at the center of the argument, he declared confidently, quote, "Qiang medicines are called Qiang medicines when Qiang medicine uses it." This outright denial, or at least undifferentiation of the ethnicity of raw materials, was shared by many privately by many others working in or with the pharmaceutical industry. In the 2 villages, although people always refer to the medicinal herbs growing in the surrounding mountains simply as medicines, the question whether these were Chinese or Qiang would either not make sense or be replied with Chinese or all the same. In ethnic medicine conferences, attributing ethnicity to raw materials was rarely embraced, and it was rather placed on the result of manufacturing and industrial processes, associating it with progress and development. Perhaps this was a way of avoiding claims of ownership towards raw materials and of limiting it to registered products. In the case of the Qiang, with the absence of registered medicines, the two cases that I will describe go against that wave, taking individual medicinal herbs and pushing for an ethnicity that in the first case of Qianghuo is anchored in a shared imagined past, and in the second of Qiangbeimu is malleable and exploited for marketing purposes. At one occasion, around a dinner table in a hotel, in one of these conferences of Qiang medicine branch of the Chinese Medical Association of Minorities, I witnessed a discussion that started. And the question was, is Qianghuo a Chinese medicine or a Qiang medicine? Dr. Zhang was sitting there and he was convinced that it was Qiang, but a few colleagues working in the pharmaceutical industry were not. The discussion was finally wrapped up by a Qiang medicine development strategist who insisted that, quote, it is both Chinese and Qiang. Endemic to Qiang and Tibetan areas, and with the name literally meaning Qiang life, the medicinal use of Qianghuo in China dates back to at least the time of the divine farmer's Materia Medica, appearing later in the compendium of Materia Medica, the Bansao Gamu, written in the 16th century Ming Dynasty, and still nowadays prescribed and sold commonly all over the country. The strategist's way of settling the argument echoed not only the commonplace use of Qianghuo in China, but also the recent changes in policy that had established minority medicine as part of Chinese medicine. However, for Dr. Zhang, this was no ordinary medicine, but I quote, a very famous medicine among Qiang medicines. The mention in Divine Farmer's Materia Medica of Qianghuo as the protector of the Qiang envoy and protector of the Qiang king made him consider the core medicine in this medical canon of over 300 medicines. According to him, there was no other medicine with such early and minute, detailed written recording as Qianghuo. Another doctor who was not as familiar with the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica instead explained the connection between Qiang nationality and Qianghuo by means of what he called a beautiful legend. I quote, a tribal leader was seriously ill, and then we had a doctor here who told him that if he took this medicine, then he would be cured. Then at the time, there was no name for this medicine. It was many years ago. We did not know how to call this medicine, but he asked the doctor what the medicine was called. He said he didn't know, and then the leader told him to call it Qianghuo, because he was the king of the Qiang who took this medicine to survive, and so called it Qianghuo. It's a legend, a beautiful legend. How does the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica explain this? Is it the same way? End of quote. Another doctor spoke of a connection between the Qiang and Qianghuo that dated back to when the Qiang lived a nomadic and hunting life in the open fields. I quote, because of the wind and cold and attack, it was very easy to get headaches, body aches, to develop dampness, so Qianghuo would be the first medicine to use. And because Qiang people were the first to use it, this endowed it with the name Qianghuo. Because the medicine has solved most of the pain and hardship of the Qiang people, made them active and allowed them to survive, so it is named Qianghuo. Its name originated this way. End of quote. Now, in contemporary medical texts, the uses for Qianghuo appear diversified when described in a context of medicine used by the Qiang, or as Qiang medicine, comparing to those of Chinese medicine. In addition to inducing sweat, relieving pain, dispelling wind, dispersing dampness, and removing humidity, and so used to treat colds and wind wet or rheumatism, in Qiang medicine it is also described as being used for numbness caused by cold and dampness, and specifically for cough, headaches, throat pain, edema, and skin ulcers. Now, for Dr. Zhang, Qianghuo did not simply cure disease, but save the Qiang king by bringing him back from the dead. And in here lies its biggest difference in properties when compared to Chinese medicine. According to him, it does not only remove the wind and dampness, as well as stopping the pain, but disperses the coldness, raises the qi, breaks the water, removes the ice, adjusts the soul, and saves the heart. This save the heart stood for inducing resuscitation, a capacity of Qianghuo to which another doctor also subscribed. Breaking the water and removing the ice were described by Dr. Zhang as properties exclusive to Qiang medicine. While stating that these were difficult to translate from Qiang language, he elaborated, I quote, Each Qiang has warm, hot, dispersing, and untying properties. It possesses these aspects and so has the use of melting ice and of rising cold to hot. Do not think that someone after dying will turn into a piece of ice. Qiang can melt it and then pull life back from the line of death. It can achieve this effect. End of quote. One academic informant stated that the Qiang people were the first to use Qiang and that among Qiang people, Qiang was the most representative medicine, and so it could be called Qiang medicine, but not Qiang medicinal material or a special medicine of Qiang medicine. This was due to the fact that there was no exclusive use by the Qiang nationality, but an overlapping use instead among various nationalities, which made it a multi-ethnic cross-use medicinal material. She appeared to be concerned with ownership, and her preferred way to describe Qiang was as an authentic medicinal material of Sichuan that hadn't had the Chuan character added to it yet. In terms of its actions, he confirmed the properties widely described in Chinese medicine, but added that in rapidly inducing sweat, Qiang could make one's pores carry away the viruses and bacteria. So this was taken in Songpinggo in a Maoshan area with medicinal herb collectors, and in these villages, this representativeness seemed very much an external representational device in itself. A village doctor told me bluntly that people there did not see any relation between Qiang and Qiang people, and like one of the town doctors added that the fact that the Qiang name for it was Sige showed it to be so. However, when I joined villagers collecting Qiang in Yangwo village, I realized quickly that just as with every medicinal herb they collected, they used Chinese names to refer to them while speaking Qiang language. Other villagers told me they did not know the Qiang name for Qiang or that such name did not exist. This, together with the fact that very few medicinal herbs were kept at home, suggests that the use of Chinese names suited the collection predominantly destined for sale to Han people, at least since the Qing dynasty. There's a scholar called Bian Simei. She did a whole year of fieldwork in this particular village, and her thesis is called Mountains, Gods, and Modernity, which is really interesting, and this is from her that I got this information. In one instance, when I asked Yangwo collectors whether there was a relation between Qiang and Qiang people, there was an indifferent silence in return. As I elicited the question, "Do you think it's your medicine?" one laughed and in a joking manner replied, "Sure, it's our thing." One thing that all informants agreed on was that every year in the summer months of collection there was less and less Qiang, and that it was necessary to climb higher and higher to find it. My host in the second village where I stayed told me how that year was the first that he was not collecting Qiang for there being too few and too far away. In the first village, however, that you see here, collectors stayed busy digging Qiang through August. Here you can see some, and as they moved up the mountains through mud, thorny bushes at an impressive speed, they were clearing the way with their adzes, and apart from Qiang they were also collecting Foshou Ten, which is Gymnadenia conopsia, and this lasted from dawn to dusk, and it was extreme hard work. And you see here the three collectors on the right, they made seem easy with their many songs, chatter, and laughter. When after being asked if I was tired, I asked the same question, one of these ladies replied, "May banfa, can't do anything about it. I need to make money." Only the roots were collected. They would dig the soil with 1 to 3 strokes of their adzes, grab the plant by the root with earth still attached to it, snap the root and smack it on the adzes handle to lose the earth, before getting it in a bag or apron pouch, all done in a repetitive motion in a very automatic fashion. Some other collectors had told me that Qiang is best when flowering, but in all occasions both the plants with flower and without it would be dug up. The collectors could easily spot both, even when these were hiding among other foliage or under trees. They could sell each jin, the equivalent to half a kilo of Qiang for a few dozen renminbi. Here you can see on the left some Qiang roots drying in a nearby village to then be sold. I was told later by my host that Qiang was often the only medicinal herb that the villagers in Yangwo would keep at home, giving its use in treating common colds, and occasionally used for headaches and joint pain. One lady in particular told me that apart from being brewed, it could also be smoked. In one particular evening, I saw Qiang being brewed together with ginger in a pot that you see here on the stove at home to treat the cough of my host's youngest son. And like with the thorough listing of effects of Qiang by Dr. Zhang and town doctors, in the two villages, discussions of the effects of Qiang were absent, as were for most other medicines. The question of what does the medicine do would not make sense. Instead, it was what do you use it for that would get informants to elaborate on how they related to the medicines that surrounded them. In my first village, often growing by the side of the road, was broadleaf Qiang, Guanye Qiang, known locally as Luyazi. For germinating very easily and therefore easy to cultivate, some villagers in the area grew it themselves and able to do the same with what they called real Qiang. Many there call this fake Qiang and argued that Luyazi was a totally different plant with a very different flavor. Its particular aroma also earned it the name of stinky Qiang, Chou Qiang, and they did not consider it medicine, while a university researcher insisted that it was merely a different species of Qiang and that it was also used in pharmacies of Chinese medicine, therefore not fake medicine. However, Dr. Zhang did not consider it to be medicine, and villagers insisted that it was far inferior to the one growing high in the mountain, an inferiority confirmed by the fact that they were only able to sell it for a third of the price. The association between cultivated and fake was for most villagers overarching. This original inability to transplant the mountain Qiang to low altitudes and the falling number of the species in the wild had led the Qiang research group at the Sichuan College of Chinese Medicine to spend the past 20 years working on a way to grow a particular cultivar of Notopterygium incisum. Bringing biologists, pharmacists, and soil specialists together, they had conducted dozens of cultivation projects to then train villagers to cultivate it themselves, all over Aba Prefecture. While they insisted that in terms of chemical composition the plants were identical, their biggest obstacle was correcting morphological differences of the cultivar they worked with, which meant that its value in the market was still much lower than its wild counterpart. As you can see here, instead of individualized long roots, the cultivar of Qiang presented a large mass of fibrous roots. In the attempt of solving this problem, which they consider the most important one, the university researcher who headed the research group drew a different distinction between medicine and medicinal material than that which had been defined by other academics when it came to Qiang. As he saw it, although the quality of their Qiang as medicine was identical to that of the wild, its quality as medicinal material was not. There were two main reasons for this. Its morphological differences could be too large to be consistent with the current description in the Chinese pharmacopoeia, and pharmaceutical enterprises could encounter some troubles when using this raw material for processing. It was not only the morphological differences, but also the lower price and the lack of any previous satisfactory consumption in the self-care villages that were all likely to make such cultivars retain the label of fake, of not as good, or of that which doesn't work, at least by most villagers who could not or would not cultivate it. Now, before I continue, I would like you to notice the writing on this label and sachets here. Maybe you've seen this somewhere. It's something I purposefully didn't mention before. Although it is widely accepted that there is no written language among the Qiang, Dr. Zhang rejected that and insisted that written language had been merely hidden from outsiders throughout history. This writing that he claims to be Qiang was on display in signs at his clinic, and you see it also here in these products. I spoke to several professors who identified this as being a script used during the Xixia dynasty. Now, about Beimu, it earned its name, which also means mother of pearl, for the morphological resemblance of the bulbs of some varieties to the bivalve. It is commonly used in China in the treatment of coughs, and in Qiang language it is called kopke. Like with Qiang, there were widespread references to morphology and content when defining its authenticity, but rather than drawing from historical features to justify the attribution of ethnicity to a medicine, the name of which had contained the character Qiang for a long time, in the case of Qiang, In this case, the character was added in recent years as part of a marketing move by a pharmaceutical company, and the variety was not recognized at Qiang among anyone else that I have met. Here you can see some Beimu products on display at a pharmaceutical company's stall during a Qiang medicine conference. The name that it is labeled under is Wabu Guobuge Qiang Beimu. Wabu stands for the variety Wabu Beimu, Fritillaria unibracteata wabuensis, and Guobuge for the Chinese transliteration of the Qiang Gopke. Next to the dried bulbs that you see here are sachets containing a powder preparation of Qiang Beimu that was sold as being easy to drink and that could be swallowed directly as well. After chatting with the pharmaceutical representative that stood behind the stall, I used the opportunity to show him what the Wabu Beimu that grew in the base outside the first village where I stayed looked like. And here it is on the right. After looking carefully at the photo, he replied that it looked fake, that the bulb did not open as it should. So about these cloves here. With the cloves staying close together instead. According to him, even at 1 year of age, the bulbs that he grew would already be opened. Another difference between them was that his Beimu did not grow in a greenhouse, but outdoors. Each bulb took a minimum of 3 years before it could be sold, being at its best at 5 years of age. When I asked why they had decided to name it Qiang Beimu, I was told that it had been the idea of a teacher who I knew and who he claimed had been working with them. A bit of a background. Wabu Beimu's bulb is considerably larger than to those other Beimu most commonly collected and consumed in China. It was first registered as a new and independent species in the early 1980s and in the 1990s recognized as a variety of Fritillaria unibracteata. It received the name Wabu Beimu since it was first identified as a species in the mountains of Wabo, Yangtze, in a neighboring county to Maoxian. According to this pharmaceutical representative, the domestication of Chuan Beimu, which includes Wabu and several other species of Beimu growing mostly in the Sichuan province, had not been successful for many years. However, at a later stage, with the Chinese pharmacopoeia introducing Wabu Beimu in 2010, with the wild resources of Beimu being gradually exhausted, with its demand far from being met, and with developing a working relationship with an experienced cultivator, all these factors provided the perfect opportunity for his company to start operations. The main reason for Wabu Beimu being chosen was Wabu Beimu's larger output and what he called a more mature planting technology. He saw beneficence in his actions, since in this way they could continue the life of this kind of Beimu and develop the industry of authentic medicinal materials in Sichuan. While remarking that there were no chemicals used in the process of planting, he elaborated on its growth conditions of climate and soil that were equivalent to that of Wabu Beimu growing in the wild, also at about 3,500 meters of altitude, with the frost in the 4 months of winter killing the insects and bacteria. His cultivation base was at an early stage of development, only had 2.5 acres of area and 15 workers, but they were planning to increase its size in the future. There, only the managers were appointed by the company. The specific planting operations in the base were all done by local Qiang people. So the many forms of Wabu Beimu bulbs that you can see here vary according to their different age, environment, and growth conditions, and the pharmaceutical representative claimed the one I was showing him did not match any of the samples that he had come across, nor that he had seen described. Among university researchers that I spoke with, the relevance of the bulb opening in determining whether it was Wabu Beimu was disputed. In his take for promotion and development, this representative was treating the fact that his product matched previously documented morphological descriptions as a token for authenticity and quality, showing superiority in relation to others that did not. With several different domesticated cultivars appearing in the past 20 years, it is likely that individual variations abound and morphological details can be used as a way to affirm authenticity by certain producers. What most of the Wabu Beimu have in common is the bigger size that you can see here when compared to the most commonly collected and used Anz Beimu. And that makes Wabu Beimu actually a lot less popularly accepted.
I was told that patients preferred the smaller beimu to take home to boil, and Chinese medicine doctors considered the small anzi beimu to be more effective, which had generated great controversy between doctors and academics, the latter who thought that they were both the same in terms of efficacy. For pharmaceutical producers who could charge a lot more for finished proprietary medicines, such as the Chuanbei and loquat cough syrup, it was a no-brainer, as they would choose to use the bigger and cheaper Wabu beimu. However, through breeding, cultivators were achieving sizes that superseded the requirements defined in the pharmacopoeia and were struggling to find a market for their enlarged Wabu beimu. Among my Qiang informants, doctors did not seem to mind either way, should it be Anze or Wabu beimu. Still, none of them referred to the large variety as being Qiang beimu. When it came to Qiang villagers, there was widespread skepticism in relation to the bigger Wabu beimu, with many claiming that its efficacy was not as good as that of Anze beimu. The village doctor explained that there were many kinds of beimu, but the one found growing on their mountain was, quote, the normal one and also the best. In his view, there was a distinction not only of morphology, but between that which was wild and that which was cultivated and so-called abnormal in its size. The representative's company was the only one, to my knowledge, using the name Qiang beimu in his product labeling, and he was the only informant referring to it as such. According to him, the idea to name Wabu beimu as Qiang beimu came after meeting this one teacher having, quote, discovered that Wabu beimu is actually Qiang beimu, and realized, quote, the Qiang people in Maoxian historically used this variety. He claimed they use it externally with best curative effect to draw out poison, treat swelling caused by insect bites, as well as painful boils, tumors, and some cancers, while in Chinese medicine it was mainly used for moistening the lung and stopping the cough. According to him, this long historic use in the particular location where they grew their Qiang beimu also allowed him to label his product as an authentic medicine. Despite of his ethnic attribution, he still privately considered it to be an ethnicity-free botanical material. The pharmaceutical representative's enthusiasm with the labeling of Wabu beimu as Qiang beimu was actually not shared by the teacher whose name origin he attributed to. When I asked her of this collaboration with this company, she dismissed it as a few meetings at conferences and said that deep-level cooperation had not yet begun. She did not seem aware of the labeling of this product as Qiang beimu, despite of the fact that she had also been in the conference where this product was being promoted, and claimed she had no knowledge of Wabu beimu being used in the treatment of cancer, only of coughs and throat ailments by villagers in the area where it was first identified. She insisted how the government would never recognize it as Qiang beimu since it was, quote, a multi-ethnic species with Han, Tibetan, Yi, and other nationalities using it. While I was unable to verify what had taken place in the meetings between the two, it was clear the teacher wanted to distance herself from such ethnic attribution to a medicinal material, and by invoking the infeasibility of such labeling in the eyes of the government, placed herself on the safe side of any ethnic disputes. When I spoke with two other researchers who had no stakes, either admitted or refuted, in this marketing move, they painted a picture that was not a stark one of governmental rejection, but that saw benefits in a labeling directed at the market, while not recognizing Wabu beimu as Qiang beimu themselves. One, after repeating the name Qiang beimu twice out loud, as if to get a feel of how the words resounded, she continued, I quote, how to look at it? If someone wants to promote our brand of Qiang medicine, to find some special entry points, to add some color to the medicine behind our nationality culture, I think this is not a bad thing. It's very good. End of quote. The creation, development, and promotion of such an ethnic product was designed to enter the Chinese market and be available in pharmacy chains all over China, and established extended commercial network that the representative took pride in. He was materializing ethnicity in a medicine for marketing purposes, not only by virtue of its place of origin, but by the fact that it was cultivated by a Qiang person and by what he thought was historical use. This approach met a format of direct-to-consumer advertising that bypassed the role of doctors. Although most Qiang doctors were still enthusiastic with the prospect of Qiang proprietary medicines being developed, of which single medicine preparations appeared as a first step, the feeling was not shared by all. One Qiang doctor in particular rejected materializing ethnicity in medicines in such way, as in his view, it all came down to how these were used. While rejecting any value to proprietary medicines in general, as well as to single medicine preparations such as powders and granules that did not require people to boil their medicines, he centered ethnicity in the role of Qiang medicine among practitioners and Qiang people alike, and claimed that one could only call Qiang medicines, as I said before, if they were used by Qiang medicine. Having a label crystallizing as a medicine as Qiang, regardless of how it was going to be used, ran counter to that. So you see here on the left, Chuan Beimu is one of the categories in the Chinese pharmacopoeia that includes several species, with a Chuan prefix meaning Sichuan, that obviously you know, and on the right, Zhi Beimu, which only has one species in the pharmacopoeia, and where the Zhi stands for Zhejiang on the east of China. The teacher who the representative claimed was involved in the Qiang Beimu name attribution told me that Wabu Beimu was considered a medicine that constituted an alternative second-wave medicine for clinicians when compared to the smaller Anz Beimu. According to her, clinicians and the industry were attempting to turn it into a food product, a medicinal food which she resented, as she thought keeping it as a medicinal material was the best outcome, even if she agreed that it was inferior in medicinal quality to the Anz Beimu. With demand far outweighing the supply and with each Beimu bulb taking years of growth before entering the market, this teacher saw saving Beimu as a lost cause, even if, as she claimed, the government had given it its highest priority, designating it a heritage authentic Sichuan medicinal material. She saw the wild Anzi Beimu was having a very low output and growing under a fragile ecological environment, both factors, quote, very difficult for human beings to influence in a short time. And for her, here lied the great advantage of Wabu Beimu. It could be grown at lower altitudes, both its output and size were very large, and the fact that the pharmacopoeia had still not changed its legal description to accommodate the Beimu of bigger sizes that were being produced was a contradiction that had not yet been solved. Now, Wabu Beimu was not the only emergent Chuan Beimu being chosen for cultivation. The head researcher of the Changhua research group was also heading a separate project for the cultivation of Taibai Beimu, and told me that although the size of Taibai Beimu is not as large as that of Wabu Beimu, it has the advantage of growing at around 1,000 meters of altitude, unlike Anzi Beimu and Wabu Beimu, which required land at around 3,000 meters high. However, it would still take a few years before they could have seeds ready. Now, there was one thing that all the informants agreed on, and that was Beimu, the Chuan Beimu regional superiority, the conviction that Chuan Beimu, with all its different species and varieties, was far superior to its historical competitor, Zhi Beimu. Doctors and academics all mentioned the latter's poor antitussive effects and its much lower price in the market. With the Beimu resources in the wild in risk of disappearing, the domestication of different varieties of Beimu accompanied very concrete prospects of profit and of starting enterprises facing an enormous demand for their products, as long as they kept to the morphological features described in the pharmacopoeia. Ethnic labeling appeared in such process at the company that I mentioned, with its representative claiming this was based on a realization rather than in a concrete marketing effort. This was a realization that stayed at odds with most Qiang people's preference for the smaller Beimu, and in fact with every informant's take on Wabu Beimu, but still among many instrumentalized as an unofficial ethnic attribution and justified as a beneficial marketing move for the promotion of Qiang medicine. Regarding Qiang Beimu, the new possibilities of ethnic denomination do not reflect on the Qiang who are not directly involved in such enterprise. It does not draw from the majority of contemporary Qiang, either in their practices, uses, or preferences. It's a labeling device that shines a light on how materiality, properties, and so-called history are derived by singling out certain geographic areas and then further designating certain individuals to speak for the whole ethnic group. In this way, who and what speaks for the Qiang gets mobilized for standardizing and marketing purposes. The workings of such generalizations are very practically minded, and the outcome is completely dependent on a possible future acceptance by the market, as well as on how well promotion is carried out. In this sort of ethnic labeling, the end justified the means, and informants moved quickly between abstract and historical arguments to reject or approve certain labels towards very pragmatic ones, easily accepting that the promotion of something bigger such as Qiang medicine justified such attributions. Now, among those working in Qiang medicine, The majority acted as having a stake in such prospective industry, and among these there was a sense of hope towards it. Among practitioners who led more humble practices without such ambitions, there was generally suspicion. Here you see two products registered by Qiang doctors for external application, used for dispelling wind and relieving joint pain. They are registered only for sale at their clinics and cannot be sold nationwide. Other Qiang doctors dismissed such products as mass-produced, and one called them Gaodan Wansan, literally meaning ointment, pellet, pill, powder, something he referred to as having been brought by the Japanese in the 1980s, and so inherently non-Qiang. It is not a recent term, and the characters also as Wansan Gaodan appear together associated with pharmaceutical technology already since the late Qing dynasty, but there is an association with the Japanese, since it was the medical reformer Yu Yan who, having studied in Japan, set up his pharmaceutical factory in China, reformulating Chinese medicines to Western medicine-style pharmaceuticals in the first half of the 20th century. It was after the 1980s, with China's economic reform, that this kind of products became widely available. Although one Qiang villager told me that she was open to the idea of buying Qiang proprietary medicines in the future, should these become available, one village doctor was very skeptical and insisted he would not. This was because, according to him, these medicines gave no guarantees, as, quote, they are not established yet. To conclude, among most of those articulating Qiang medicine and Qiang medicines, there is a real sense of enthusiasm and urgency in this endeavor, envisioning a win-win scenario of benevolence that benefits everyone, while still with a promise of particular wealth and reputation for those leading this cause. The main strategist between the most influential Qiang medicine doctor is a Han individual without a medical background, but one of marketing instead, and he explained to me why there should be primacy given to medicines. I quote, If minority medicine wants to develop, it is medicines, not medicine, that will really contribute the most to its development. One doctor sees a few patients, but medicines are different. The one that circulates in the market, the one that has a registration number, is targeting a group of more than 1 billion people in China. End of quote. In conferences of minority medicine, I saw doctors of different ethnicities parading research on particular active ingredients, developing at length on biomedical etiology and pathology, and the use of several lab techniques under the banner of One Belt, One Road. This trend meets what has been described and researched by Elizabeth Su and Sean Lei on medicines used as antimalarials, respectively Qinghao and Shangshan. When I asked someone heading the newly founded Association of TCM-Appropriate Technology why he thought so many minority doctors would like to have their own proprietary medicines, he told me that it is, I quote, like a cook in Sichuan who wants his Sichuan cuisine to feature among the famous national dishes. The fact that Qiang doctors are not yet able to spread their so-called dishes over the country was put down to missed opportunities in the 80s and 90s, a time when it was very easy to get medicines registered, and unlike among other minorities like the Miao, the Qiang reputedly did not get timely information on this. This was now seen as the cause for the current bottlenecking, since with the stringent registration demands currently in place, Qiang doctors are not yet able to launch their medicines in the nationwide market. This can only be done for small-scale production and sale at their clinics. What was pervasive among most doctors and academics working on Qiang medicine was an evolutionist stance, a desire for the Qiang not being called backward, and a determination to combine what they are doing with present technology. The tensions that could arise between the two different modes of healing, that of a personalized therapeutic solution arranged in a doctor-patient encounter, and of a product that could be advertised directly to the consumer, did not seem relevant for most. The doctor producing the Boeing Holo Joe, you saw here on the right, explained to me how the individual and the industrial can easily run side by side. Quote, this is the development of an industry. In an industry, you have to move forward. The times are developing, so you also have to develop. Again, there was an insistence on the benevolence of industry and on being able to benefit more people through mass production, in the case of his medicines, to be able to reach many with the effectiveness that it had reportedly carried through centuries. In this, he agreed with standardization for the industry, but not for his individual practice, where he could adjust doses to patients as he saw fit. Therefore, there is no talk of modernity here, but instead of the country's maxim, inherit and develop, a sort of developed tradition, not ambitioning to reach a stage of modern, but to continue on a gradual path of developing the inherited. Qiang ethnicity, however, is already being used by at least this one pharmaceutical company in marketing the cultivated raw materials and extracts that they produce, but not in the same way as Qiang Beimu that I have shown you. Here you can see a screenshot from a promotional video that portrays a rescuer with the company's badge saving a Qiang child from the 2008 earthquake rubble. This was a devastating earthquake that killed around 80,000 people, about 30,000 of whom were Qiang, which roughly accounts for 10% of the whole Qiang population at the time. This company had a program for alleviation of poverty in Qiang areas, but did not disclose details of the work they do, and I'm positive they did not have a rescue team. This is instead an allegorical portrait of saving the Qiang. And so, under the guise of poverty alleviation and job creation, the true motor for the ambitions of those working on Qiang medicines is the prospect of entering the vast Chinese and international markets of Materia, Medica, medicines and supplements. Therefore, catering for the imagination both of the Han majority and of that of foreigners is central to this endeavor, while there is a deep disinterest among ethnic Qiang who are not involved in this enterprise in relation to such products or in labeling medicines as of Qiang ethnicity. Interestingly, the Qiang, by virtue of being a historically Han-defined other, shed a light on the majority itself. It comes down to an external group definition and construction that loops back into the Han majority in the form of ethnic clothing, ethnic places, and ethnic medicines. Thank you.